Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Just a Person podcast, a show that explores life's highs, lows, and in-betweens. I'm Madison, and this week I sat down with Carmen. We talked about why she got into documentary filmmaking, how she chooses what types of stories to tell, and how telling those stories has impacted her life. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the episode. Hello, Carmen.
Hi, Madison.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm very excited to have you on, and let me tell you why. The first person I ever told about this idea was actually you. I don't know if you know that.
Oh my gosh, that makes me so happy.
But I don't know if you remember that. I told you, this was probably like at this point almost 2 years ago. The idea was something completely different, and you kind of gave me the idea to make it into a podcast. So thank you for that.
I'm so glad you've gotten into this. I've been listening to your episodes, and you guys have been doing a great job. You know, as a documentary filmmaker, of course, I love hearing people's stories. So this is kind of just like inspiration for me. So no, it's super cool that kind of the origin story, I got to be involved in that. Thanks.
It's so weird because we met on LinkedIn during quarantine.
Yeah.
I've never met you in real life.
I know.
Which it's just so funny that we barely know each other, but you had such a big influence on this, you know?
Yeah, no, it's super cool. The virtual worlds of, connecting and networking is so, it's so real now. You're right. Like, I feel like the people I feel closest to, I've never even met in person anymore.
The people that get you and what you want to do with your career, you don't even know them.
Totally. Yes.
So we're going to get started. Typically, I do actually have a hat with questions in it. Typically, I pull one out, but I actually just want to ask you this question because I heard it the other day and I thought it was really an interesting question, which is, what is something that you do that you almost never get right? So, for example, I can go first if you'd
Yes,
like.
please.
It doesn't have to be anything super serious, but for me, it's like a joke in my family. I have a really hard time opening mail. I can't, I cannot open envelopes. I don't know what it is. I literally have to just rip them in half. I can't open it. And I also cannot click my heels. I've been trying for years and I can't, I just kind of jump up in the air and that's pretty much it.
That's amazing. I feel like this question is so open-ended. It could really be so many things.
Mm-hmm. But I thought that's so interesting because people really never talk about things that they literally cannot do. There's just things, you cannot figure out. And for me, those are two of them.
Honestly, oh gosh, I'll have to go with probably cooking. I'm not the best cook. It doesn't really end up well, I can have a recipe and follow the directions, but there's always something that goes awry. And possibly that is due to my ADHD, possibly just not not destined to be a cook. But yeah, I would watch Food Network with my mom growing up and always aspire and be in awe of these people who could just magically put different foods together and make it taste good. But no, alas, I still meander the frozen dinner section at the store.
That's fine. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Thankfully, my partner, Evan, we've been together for 8 years and he cooks. So
then you don't even need to worry about it.
Exactly. So I do the dishes, he cooks,
So besides trying to learn how to cook with your mom, what else was going on in your childhood?
So I grew up as a pastor's daughter. We hopped around from Indiana to Connecticut, and then I spent most of my life in small town Wisconsin. I have two younger brothers. My mom and dad were together, but they ended up getting divorced a couple years ago. And honestly, I think it's okay for me to say this at this point. I don't think their relationship was ever healthy or passionate or I don't know. I don't remember looking at my parents and thinking, oh my God, these people are in love, So it was just kind of like a quiet household. Everyone kept to themselves. So I had to learn to kind of entertain myself. I think that's where I got to foster a lot of my creativity. So I really liked writing short stories and songs and stuff like that. But being a pastor's daughter, any other pastor's kid will tell you, it's kind of anxiety inducing, just having all eyes on you. You're the example of a good Christian and you feel like you have to do everything right. And then also having undiagnosed OCD made me really feel like I had to do everything perfectly. So, yeah, I was a straight A student, tried to do all the things very, perfectly. And in the meantime, I was always drawn to people's stories and hearing people talk about their own lives. I felt like it was kind of an escape for me where I could just kind of lose myself and learning about someone else.
I get that. I feel like when you're watching TV or listening to something like this or like whatever it is, whether it's real or not, just hearing something that sometimes, you're like watching a TV show and a character says something and it like clicks for like something in your head and you're like, oh, I totally get that.
Yeah, and it's surprised, like I'm surprised all the time where I get those kind of aha moments, like who I get them from, what other cultures I get them from. Like it's kind of crazy how universal our human experiences can be.
So at what point did you know that you wanted to be a filmmaker?
I actually tried going to college for creative writing because I wanted to write books. I'm glad I got some advice not to do that. I'm props to whoever can make that work, but not a super lucrative, you know, job. I was worried about being able to make a living. So I thought the next best thing is visual storytelling, which is filmmaking. I wasn't super drawn to Hollywood filmmaking, but my freshman year, I kind of did some narrative short films and eventually found my home in documentary, which is where I actually feel like I belong. And which is funnily enough, like also not a lucrative job at all. I'm glad I learned video editing. I've been editing ever since I was 12 years old, I think. So, major tip to all those creatives out there, get a marketable skill that you can actually make money off of while you're doing the thing you love at the same time.
First of all, that's hilarious that you thought creative writing wasn't lucrative enough. So you switched to documentary filmmaking.
I know. Okay, well, technically my major is digital media. So that encompasses like graphics and website building. Like I have all those other skills. I just never really put my time into trying to make money off of those skills. But no, you're right.
Yeah, that's kind of my brother says like similar things. He went to school for graphic design, but he works in marketing kind of now. He always says that like you can really do whatever you want in your spare time, but you have to have enough skills to be the one that people like look to hire.
Totally.
That's interesting what you said though, that you just wanted to tell stories. You didn't care if you were writing or you're like, oh, I guess I'll make films, like that's the next best thing. That personally to me is exactly how I feel too. Like I always thought maybe this is how you felt about writing, but I always thought like, oh, I want to go to school for film. I have to make that work. I have to do this. And then during quarantine, when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, no, I just really want to tell stories like in whatever way best suits the story, not necessarily in my head what I think I need to do.
Yes. I love that. That shows so much like I feel like that's very wise, but also being flexible like that really does lend itself to doing whatever story you're telling as much justice as you can. Because you're right, like some stories, these kinds of stories work well on podcasts, but if it was like a very visual story, you'd obviously want to do filmmaking or videos or TikTok. You really have to think about where the story you're trying to tell belongs. And I feel like you do that really well.
That's what we talk when we talk about when I to talk to you about this idea and you were like, I don't think it's necessary to do like a whole production about it, like it's not necessary to do a whole even like I don't have to travel and go places and like make these huge stories. We're just talking on Zoom, like that's all it really requires.
Well, yeah, and it can be that someday, but I feel like burnout is such a real thing nowadays. Like, and I don't think it's really required to do all the platforms for everything you do. So this works so well as a podcast medium just because like you can just sit down and listen and can have longer conversations without having to keep it visually engaging. So
Right, right. So I guess along with that, what are the types of story? I mean, in documentary, there's so many types of documentaries and so many styles and stuff like that. What types of stories are you interested in telling?
I'm really drawn to character-driven documentaries. I would love to be good at topic documentaries, like, a documentary on climate change or, like those more educational Ken Burns style documentaries. But for me, I have to have a person that I'm drawn to and telling their personal story because there's human experience and emotion and stuff like that attached to it. And I think I'm just really drawn to honoring that. It's hard for me to wrap my head around huge topics. I mean, I just wrapped on a documentary that could arguably be called like a disability documentary, but I didn't go into it wanting to make a disability documentary because that's a huge topic. So it's just a story about a family who has experience with disability, and that's what I'm more drawn to are people who have these experiences who can tell their own stories and hopefully like scratch the surface on such a big thing.
You tell me your opinion on this because I do think about this a lot. So, if you were to make, say, a documentary about climate change versus a documentary, which we will talk about your documentary. So, a documentary about like a specific person and something they're experiencing. Sometimes it feels a bit like when you're making like something about a specific topic, it feels a bit more like telling the story through yourself, whereas like if you're telling the story of someone, it's just them telling their story through like you're just giving them the platform to tell their story. I mean, sure, you picked the topic or like the person and whatever, but it's pretty much just about them.
No, that's a really interesting way to look at it. And I'm trying to think of some examples, but like the Greta Thunberg documentary, I don't know if I'm saying her last name right, but she's a huge climate change activist. So the film did touch on those topics, but it was through her eyes. Whereas, like, oh, An Inconvenient Truth, that's an older film on climate change, but it's more topical. And you're right, like, the filmmaker's voice does come through because you have to make, big decisions about what parts of that topic you're going to cover.
Right. Like it has to be through somebody's voice.
Yeah, yeah.
So if it's not through a person, it's kind of through your own.
Yeah, totally. And I love personal documentaries, like filmmakers who can interweave their own stories into the stories they're telling. Super cool. I've not gotten to that point because it's kind of scary to like have the attention on you. In fact, this is like even intimidating because I think a big reason I like to be behind the camera is because the focus is not on me. So,
Right. I get that. I mean, even in this scenario, like I'm behind the camera, it's not about me. So I understand that for sure.
yeah, definitely. And there's something freeing about that. But then also you have to, like, I feel like if we're asking all these people to tell their stories to us, we also have to know what that feels like to tell our own story so that we can empathize with that process.
So in the first season, Sienna and I each did our own episode about ourselves. We were talking about that. We're like, if you're doing this, like asking that of someone, you kind of have to put your money where your mouth is.
Uh-huh. Totally.
Let's talk about this documentary you just made. Let's just start with like, where did you get the idea from? How did you pick the subject?
So the documentary is called Teacher Patience, and it's about an Indiana family's efforts to educate first responders about Down syndrome. And this family does presentations called the Emily Talk, which is named after the daughter in the film, Emily, who has Down syndrome. And I attended an Emily Talk and was so blown away with how raw and honest and just open they were about their own lives. I saw immediately that they would be amazing documentary film subjects. So I walked up to them right after their presentation and asked if I could make a film about them. Probably not the most calculated move, but they said yes immediately, and we built trust after the fact. Normally I would like to build trust before asking if I can make a film about them, but it ended up working out. They're really passionate people, passionate about telling the story about how important it is to include disability awareness into first responder training programs and programs like social workers and teachers.
Can I ask why were you at the Emily Talk in the first place?
Yeah, good question. So they also do the presentation for the wider community, and this one happened to be at a local high school for like community people to go to, just whoever wanted to show up. And I was scrolling through Facebook events because I was itching for a new documentary subject, and it just sounded interesting to me. Something kind of told me I had to go. So I showed up. There were like 200 people there. It was huge, a huge audience. So kind of intimidating, but I mean, they have this family has become, I mean, they've kind of like adopted me into their family. They invite me to go camping with them, they invite me to holidays and stuff. Like, it's kind of insane how the process of documentary filmmaking really brings you so, so close to people. It's an intimate process.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine because you're capturing like very delicate moments in their life.
And that was so hard with this film because Emily, it's hard to know if she fully like grasps what I'm doing with my camera. And my main goal was for Tom, Tina, and Emily, the parents and Emily, to feel like I've done justice to their story. So it's hard to not be able to get that kind of feedback from Emily, but she and I have become close friends, and I'd like to think I can read her well enough to know that, when she watches the film, she seems pleased with it, but there are a lot of intimate moments there that we filmed, and I hope people who watch it will really like respect that this family opened up their lives to be able to show them that.
How do you know when you're filming what's the line between what's too much to put in?
There's definitely a line where it feels exploitative with this film. There are times where we needed to show when Emily was not having a great day because that'll teach first responders how to deal with those kinds of behaviors. But there are also times where like she is struggling so much and like just her parents are not having an easy time dealing with it. And like I just kind of feel it in my gut to just turn off the camera. I think it's definitely an intuition thing. You have to build that trust with your subjects so you know kind of where the line is because it's different for everyone. And anytime we would have like a difficult scene like that, afterwards I would always debrief with the three of them and ask, was it okay that I filmed that? Do you want me to delete the footage? Are you okay with that possibly ending up in the film? So we would make sure that everyone was happy with what we captured and was okay with, what ended up in the film versus not.
I mean, they are trusting you with like so much, it's so vulnerable for you to like turn around and betray their trust. That would be a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And me myself having a disability, I felt an extra level of responsibility with this film. I wanted to represent Emily as like a full character with both virtues and flaws like every other character. Because I think a lot of times what happens with disability films is that the person with the disability is made out to be a hero. And we call that inspiration porn because it doesn't show them as real human beings with struggles, just like the rest of us. So.
I mean, if you would like to talk about having a disability, feel free. I'm not going to force that on you. But do you feel that that influences the way that you like want to tell stories or the way that you see things and the way that you see how different stories need to be told?
Yeah. So with my OCD, I think it falls under being neurodivergent because it is so intertwined in the way I think. Like I have an OCD brain. It's every thought I have feels connected to that, which is interesting because I have a lot of black and white thinking with that. So it'll either be 0 or 100. I have problems seeing gray areas, which is so funny because life is just one big gray area, right? Like, so when I'm trying to tell these people's life stories, I think sometimes I really struggle with finding and telling like the gray area, the intricacies, and that's a good challenge for me to be able to like open myself up to possibilities that aren't just black or white. Another thing, I think OCD makes me my personal experience with OCD makes me really detail oriented because I feel like I have to capture absolutely everything to do justice to someone's story, meaning I spent a lot of money on hard drives, but it's fine. But I think it gives me like a special eye towards like the littlest things. I'm really empathetic and I feel like, me being able to feel people's emotions and put that to like an MP4 file. I mean, it takes a lot of care to stitch that together. So I think my OCD has gotten in the way of me telling stories, but also has helped me. That's just like everyone else. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but it's definitely like a key part of who I am. So I'm totally cool talking about it. And I was just diagnosed with it. last year. So I'm still on a journey of knowing exactly where it shows up for me as well, even though I've had it all my life. So there are little ways every day where I'm like, oh, wait, that's OCD. That's kind of funny.
Isn't it so crazy to live your whole life one way and then realize like that's not normal?
Oh, yeah, it's earth-shattering. Like, I had a full-on existential crisis when I found out my diagnosis, but it also was so freeing because it was like, oh my God, things finally make sense now. Like, why I do this thing that makes me so upset. Like, it's so frustrating that I do this thing. I get why I do it now. I've been trying to dig into like where certain obsessions, compulsions come from and, how to slowly but surely, try to heal those and counteract them. But I think it'll always be part of who I am. It's not really something that goes away. It's just something I kind of learn to live with, which has been an interesting journey so far.
What would you say to people that in whatever way want to tell stories of underrepresented communities, whether I guess whether they're a part of them or not?
I've always been drawn to telling those kinds of stories. So I've done films on gender and sexuality and mental health and disability now. And I think the number one thing I have learned is that if you don't have experience with it directly, to definitely bring on a producer or what's it called? An advisor, who can lead you through it and give you some insights because it's really important. Like, we have a responsibility to these communities to tell their story in a respectful way. And sometimes, like, there are unconscious biases and things that we're not even aware that we're doing that might actually harm the community when we're telling their story. So it's important to have people from those communities involved in some way. That doesn't mean you have to be from the community. It just means you got to bring in those people to help.
Yeah, I think you can have the very best intentions, but still get it wrong.
Oh, 100%. Yep.
I should have addressed this earlier. When we were talking about your film, you just premiered it. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? I can't believe we just brushed right over that.
No, that's okay. So Teacher Patience just had its world premiere at Indie Shorts, which is an extension of Heartland Film. So it's an Academy Award qualifying festival. We didn't walk away with an award, but that's totally fine with me. Like, I was really honored to be part of that lineup. I think they said they had like 3,000 films submitted and like 150 selected or something along that line. So yeah, I felt pretty good about myself. And we got to like the family got to come and watch everyone else watch their film, like their story. And that was so cool. Emily was like crying in the beginning, and I think it like really hit her, the emotion of it all, of like having your story on a big screen. It was just such a powerful night. And we got to do a Q&A afterwards, which was super cool. And I met a bunch of awesome filmmakers who I'm going to stay in touch with. So it's just a cool night. I'm really grateful for it. And now, we're going on to do more film festivals and community screenings, educational screenings for first responders, et cetera, et cetera.
That's pretty cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's not necessarily about like the point of doing it isn't, for like an award.
No,
It's
yeah.
for like, the just telling the story and like getting it out there and seeing, someone like Emily, whoever's the subject, like just so emotional because they got to tell their story and like it's going to impact other people.
100%. Yeah, it can never, I feel like it can't be about the awards, otherwise you'll drive yourself crazy because there are so many reasons that, people say no. And it's almost, it's not necessarily personal to the projects. There are just so many reasons you get rejection, and that's okay.
Is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
I'm curious, like, how you found interviewing people about their life stories. Like, do you feel like it brings you closer to those people? Have you felt like you've become a little more comfortable telling your own story?
I would say yes to both. I think that talking to other people, first of all, like a lot of the people on here I do know personally, and some people are like my family or my really close friends. But even like if I talk to them, like I've learned a lot about them, and also they'll say to me like afterwards, "Oh, that was really interesting. I've never talked to somebody about this experience like that." Like I'm not gonna was an example. Like I'm not gonna go up to my mom and ask her like, hey, what was it like raising me? Like, what
Yeah,
was it like to find out you were gonna be a mom? Like, that's just, it's so random.
it
But
is.
I
Yeah.
think it makes me think a lot more about other people, and it makes me feel like it's not because I too, like you have a hard time like talking about myself or my feelings. I always have. Everybody knows it. Like that's not a secret. And I think it makes me realize like things are a big deal, but like they're not that big of a deal. Like you can say it and nothing's gonna happen. I mean, not nothing, but like, the world's not gonna blow up, you know?
Yeah. No, I totally get that. Yes. It's weird that like recording or memorializing someone's story via podcast or film or a video or a picture, like it's weird how that kind of gives us an excuse to pick people's brains and like ask questions we might not feel comfortable asking over coffee or something. I've definitely used that to my advantage. Like if I want to meet someone cool, I'm like, will you be on this podcast? Or
Literally.
can I make a film about you?
Yeah, sometimes I'm like, I don't really have anything to talk to you about. I just want to talk to you. Like, come on.
Exactly. Exactly. And not to like, I hope this doesn't dampen the mood or anything, but my mom was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and that's been really hard for me at 23. Like, my mom losing her kind of sense of self and her history, and to not have been able to capture that is really tough. So, like, I feel like I would just like to encourage everyone to go and have those conversations with their loved ones. And if it makes you feel more comfortable, say it's for like a project or something and record it and like memorialize it because there was like one little self-portrait video I got to do for college, and I got to interview my mom about my childhood. And I watched that like every day because that's her. Like I got to capture and memorialize who she is in a video, and that means so much to me because you never know, like when someone's going to be gone. And I think what we do, telling people stories and just capturing those for eternity, like it's very powerful. So, and it's not just for us, like anyone can do this.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And you can just have these conversations. It's really not that weird.
Yeah, right.
It's a lot weirder in your head than in real life. But I don't know if you find this, but for me, since I started doing this, people like you texted me that about your mom and like whatever else, and people like do that now. They'll be like, "Oh yeah, this happened," like, or "I'd love to talk about this on your podcast," or they'll just tell like people are a lot more open about things
Yes.
to me now, and I think that in reverse, like so am I, but I think I'm also like now much more receptive to listen. Not that I wasn't before, but it's just like you're a lot more understanding of people. I don't know if that's something you experience.
Well, you've had practice. Yeah, you've had practice like how to drop people's, stories and vulnerabilities out and respect those and create a safe space for those. I think that's super cool to hear because I think a similar thing has happened to me. When people see that you have that sensitivity to other people's stories and are open to hearing them, I think people are craving a safe space to share that. So that's super cool.
And like what an honor to be that, you know?
Yeah, totally. I know. Yes.
Like it's whatever people talk to me about, I'm like, thank you. Like what an honor that you like share that with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being on here. I had a great time. I love talking about filmmaking, and I am very excited to see Teacher of Patience. I cannot wait until I can watch it.
Oh,
I'm
thank
gonna tell
you.
everybody about it. I've seen the preview like 10 times. So
Oh my God. You're so sweet. Thank you. Yes.
I'm very excited.
I'm excited too, and so excited to see your next season come out and hear all the other stories you've been telling. And I'm so proud of you and like proud to know you. So
Same.
thanks, Madison.
All right. Thanks so much again to Carmen for being a guest on the show today. If you have a story you want to personally share on the show, want to be read on air, or a topic you'd like to see discussed, find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at JustAPersonPod, or send us an email at justapersonpod@gmail.com. And we'll see you next Monday with another new episode.